100 ELO is the lowest ELO on chess.com. And I'm going to be moving that account from 100 all the way to 2000, showing you guys every single thing that you need to know to get better at chess. Watch this full video so you can learn all the fundamentals and your ratings should get higher. So the first game is off the books. Our opponent is also rated 100. I'm going to be using all the openings that I already showed you guys. And our opponent made the first mistake in the opening stage of the game. It's very important that you move your central pawns and you want to move the pawns that covers the central square. So moving the pawn to a6, it suggests that the opponent is not really sure what's happening. At this level, we're just going to be developing four minor pieces, like the simplest chess there is. And this is how we're going to be winning our games. The opponent decided to play pawn to g5. And I mean, at this level, players are just going to be blundering pieces, giving away pieces, all the way up to the 500 level, to be honest. So he plays pawn g5. The bishop on c1 is pointing towards that pawn on g5. There is no pieces protecting this pawn. So I'm able to capture the free pawn, and we're already ahead by 1 point. And then the opponent decided to play the move pawn to h6. Now, at this level, how you're going to be winning your games is literally either you take the opponent's pieces or the opponent just take all your pieces. So looking on the opponent's last move is vital. The pawn moves to h6. The pawn is attacking our bishop that is on g5. So what we need to do is we need to find a safe square for our bishop. So I'm going to pull my bishop back to f4. Why f4? It covers one of the central squares. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be developing all our pieces. When I use the word develop, I'm basically referring to taking out all our pieces, and I'm trying to take out all my minor pieces. The minor pieces are like the knights and the bishops, and again, we are at the 100 level, so you are going to be seeing moves like this. The opponent plays the move pawn to f6. The first thing we could learn from this game is you're not going to be playing good chess if you're only moving your pawns. By moving the pawn to f6, he's exposing this diagonal pointing towards the king. And I'm introducing you guys to something that is called a checkmate, where we move the queen to h5, the queen points towards the king, we check the opponent's king. But if we're able to check the opponent's king and he's not able to block or get out of check, then that's called a checkmate. The first game is off the books. Let's keep going. The second game is off. The opponent started by playing pawn to d4, putting a pawn in the center of the board. And I'm just going to respond by doing the same thing. Let's play the move pawn to d5, putting a pawn in the center of the board as well. You all know what the goal is, developing all four minor pieces as quickly as possible. Queen to d3 was played, and this is a mistake that our opponent is making, which is to developing the queen too early. You definitely don't want to be developing your queen this early. You want to be focusing on your knight and your bishop, which is why I'm about to play the move knight to f6, because once the game just starts, once you're in the opening, you focus on your knight and your bishop. Pawn to e3 was played. It's not a terrible move, but one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is you don't want to block out your bishops like this. Notice how by moving his pawn to e3, the bishop on c1 is not as mobile, and his light squared bishop on f1 is also not as mobile because he developed the queen too early. But let's just continue with our development here. Let's go knight c6. Now we have 2 out of 4 pieces developed, and the goal is to have 4 pieces developed so that we were able to castle our king. Now, bishop to d2 was played. He's developing his bishop now. I'm trying to develop my bishop on c8. Now, let me tell you guys how I'm going to be arriving at my next move. I'm trying to put my bishop on this f5 square. But in order for us not to blunder, it's very important that we check to see if the opponent's pieces are covering the squares that we're trying to put our pieces on. So if I put my queen on f5, he's just going to take the bishop with his queen. With that being said, I'm going to play the move pawn to g6. Why pawn to g6 is so that way my pawn defends the f5 square. So that way, once I put my pawn on the f5 square, I'm attacking the queen and he's not able to take my pawn. So bishop to e2 was played. Let's continue with our plan. Our plan is still to develop. So I'm going to play the move bishop to f5. Bishop to f5 is attacking the opponent's queen. And if the queen takes my bishop, my pawn is there to protect the bishop. And then the opponent plays pawn to e4. And you guys are going to be seeing counting mistakes all the way up to like 700, 800. Like
really just understand how to count properly, and you're not going to be making these types of mistakes. Now, he did in fact manage to not lose his queen, but he basically just put the pawn in the way. I mean, I have like one, two, three pieces covering the e4 square. He only has his queen covering the e4 square. So once I take this free pawn, it doesn't really matter how I take. I could choose to take with any one of my pieces, but I'm going to take with the pawn. And taking with the pawn is also attacking the queen. But that's not the only reason why I took with the pawn. It allows my queen on d8 to also attack his pawn on d4. So now I have one, two pieces attacking the pawn on d4, and he's only guarding it with his queen. The opponent saw the threat, moved the queen out the way, and now I'm going to capture another free pawn. Now, I know I tell you guys the goal is to develop the pieces, but if the opponent makes a mistake, we want to punish them for the mistake. Again, let's count. The queen protects the pawn. We have two pieces attacking the pawn. So it doesn't really matter which piece we take with. I'm going to choose to take with the knight. And just like that, we're ahead by two pieces. Well, two pawns coming out of the opening stage of the game. And the opponent has to be careful not to lose this queen or get this queen trapped. Because if you develop your queen too early, you are putting yourself at risk of trapping your queen. Bishop to c3. Now, here's the intention with bishop to c3. The opponent wanted to attack my knight. Remember, it's very important that you look on the opponent's last move. And now he's attacking my knight with not only his bishop, but he's also attacking my knight with his queen. So there are two pieces attacking my knight. I'm only defending my knight once. Now, something I want to introduce you guys to is called the drawback principle. It's going to make a lot more sense to you guys once you're like 5, 6, 700. But how the drawback principle works is you want to see the slight changes in the position. Now, here's what I'm seeing. Notice how this queen on c4 was in fact guarding this pawn on c2, which means if my knight takes on c2, the queen is just going to take on c2. But now that he decides to play bishop c3, the queen is no longer guarding the c2 square. So I'm now able to play the move knight takes c2 check. This is called a fork, by the way, because my knight checks the opponent's king and my knight also attacks the opponent's rook. The king is now forced to move to the f1 square. It's the only way to get out of check. There's nothing that is able to capture my knight, so the king just has to go to f1. And once the king goes to f1, then I'll take the rook and I'll be ahead by an entire rook. King moves out the way. Let's grab the rook. And then the opponent decides to play the move queen to d4. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is if you are behind in material, then you should not try to trade the queens off the board. So that's also a mistake that my opponent just played. Now, I'm the one who is ahead in material. I'm ahead by like 5, 6, 7 points. So 8 points. So what I'm going to do is I am going to trade the queens off the board, seeing that I'm ahead in material, and I am expecting him to take with the bishop. And then once he decides to take with the bishop, now I'm trying to finish my development. We still have a piece that is on the back rank that has not yet moved. Remember, the goal once the game just begins is to ensure that you move every single piece on the back rank. So let's play the move bishop to g7. This is called a fianchetto bishop, by the way. Whenever you move like your G pawn or your B pawn and you put your bishop on this very long diagonal, you're basically fianchetto in your bishop. So the opponent decided to capture our knight. For us, it's fine. It's just a trade. They take our knight. We're just going to be taking back the knight. And keep in mind, the mistake that the opponent is making is he's just trying to trade all the pieces, even though he's the one behind in material. But the opponent is only rated 211. So again, we're going to be seeing all the types of mistakes that persons make in chess. And then once you're able to understand all the types of mistakes that people make in chess, then you're going to be able to spot those mistakes even at the higher level, and you're also not going to be making those mistakes. Okay, let's look on the opponent's last move. It is pointing towards our king, so it's called a check. There are a lot of different ways to get out of check. I mean, not a lot, maybe like three. So one way to get out of check is by blocking the check. Another way to get out of check is by just moving the king. That should be your last resort. And then another way to get out of check is just to capture the piece that is attacking your king. We're not able to do that, so let's simply block the check, attack the opponent's bishop. If he does not move that bishop away, we're going to simply take the bishop and we're going to be ahead by even more material. So he moved the bishop out the way. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply castle my king. This is called long castling, by the way, or simply castling on the queen side. In chess, you are able to castle on both the king and the queen side. Now, what I want you guys to also notice is the fact that my rook is on this open file. This is called an open file. The files goes up and down on the chessboard, and the ranks goes side to side, and then there's also diagonals. Now, my opponent just decided to play the move knight to e2, which is a development move. He's trying to develop his knight, but we are at the very, very low level. So hopefully you guys are finding this entertaining as well as educational, because there is a checkmate in this position. The king is not able to move. Once I play the move rook to d1 check, it checks the king. But because the king has nowhere to go after I check the king, that's the reason why it's just checkmate. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. Our next opponent is 178. We already played e4, so let's play pawn to d4. I'm going to try to use all the openings that I already taught you guys. Pawn to d5 was played, and let's just play a simple London system. I mean, I'm sure persons at the lower level, I don't recommend that you guys even know the name of the opening that you're playing, to be honest, like at this level. So the London system is basically one of those lies where you don't necessarily have to work on the opening. You just need to know where to put the pieces and then you should be fine. So knight c6 was played. My opponent is following principles. Remember what our game plan is, by the way. We're just improving our pieces. With that being said, the first plan is to get all four minor pieces out. One minor piece is out, two minor pieces out. That's how simple it is. And the opponent made their first mistake. This is called an unnecessary pawn move. Now, whenever I ask my beginner students about, like, I'm like, why did you play this move? Their answer is always, I didn't want the knight to get to g5. Now, tell me, if my knight was to get to the g5 square, then what? There's nothing happening. So it's like they're seeing ghost, But that's fine. Let's just keep developing our pieces. We have two pieces developed. We need two more pieces that needs development. So let's play the move pawn to e3. Why pawn to e3? Because it allows us to develop our third minor piece. Bishop to g4, very good move by my opponent, developing the bishop, also pinning my knight to my queen. This is called a pin. Now, there's two types of pin in chess, and luckily I'm able to show it to both of you guys. There's the relative pin, where your piece is pinned to a more valuable piece, which means I am able to move the knight out the way. But if I move my knight out the way, I will lose my queen, which is very valuable. Now, there's also an absolute pin, which is the move that I just played, where I'm pinning the knight to the king. In an absolute pin, the definition of a pin is still the same. A piece is not able to move because it exposes a more valuable piece, which means it would be an illegal move to even move the knight. So the opponent decided to play queen to d7, breaking the pin. Now the knight is not absolutely pinned, but the knight is still relatively pinned. We have one, two, four pieces developed. What's the plan? Get, no, am I counting? One, two, three pieces developed. So let's get our last piece out. Now we have four pieces developed, and then the opponent just played the move pawn to a6. Now, it's very important that we look on the opponent's last move when we're playing. It's also very important that we're not playing chess too fast. So pawn to a6 was played. It is attacking our bishop. It would be not bad if we take this knight, but I want you guys to build a habit of understanding that a knight or a bishop is in fact slightly better than a knight. So if you're not about to double your opponent's pawns or win at pawn or just get something for trading the bishop, don't be trading your bishops for a knight. So what I recommend that you guys do, especially when you're pinning someone's knight and a pawn attacks the bishop, just pull the bishop back to, let's say, a4. We're still maintaining the pin on the opponent's queen, and which means if he moves the knight, we're going to take his queen. A lot of times you're going to see them play pawn to b5, attacking the bishop again, but now we're just going to pull our bishop back to b3. And what we could say is he's like pushing his pawns for no reason, especially if he decides to castle his king on that side of the board. Then he's already going to be exposing his king. And then my opponent decided to play the move pawn to g5. Now this is very, very aggressive. My opponent is playing some aggressive chess at the, what's this guy's rating? Jesus. He's only 170. He's playing too bad, to be honest. My bishop is under attack. Let's just pull the bishop back. At this level, it's very important that you pay attention to the opponent's last move. All four of my minor pieces are already developed. So what's the plan from here? The plan is to get the king out the center of the board. Like, you don't necessarily have to develop all four of your minor pieces before you castle the king. I would suggest that you castle your king as quickly as possible. So your king needs to be castled. All four of your minor pieces needs to be developed. And if you still not understand what I mean by this, I mean take out both of your knights, take out both of your bishops. Another very important thing that you guys need to keep in mind, Obviously, we know that we need to look on the opponent's last move and just check all the squares to see where that piece is covering. And if it's not really attacking anything first, then we just play our attacking moves. Now, there are two pieces that is currently on our half of the board. Whenever you guys are playing chess, it's very important that you follow the principle called the principle of neutralization, something that I learned from Igor Smirnov. And he basically said, if a piece is on your half of the board, immediately put the question to that piece. Pawn to a3 is fine. I'm going to choose to play pawn to c3 so that way I'm able to just, pull my bishop back in the game, putting it on this very good diagonal. So now the opponent is forced to move the knight. He did decide to put the knight on d3. Again, let us look on the opponent's last move. The knight is here. We just want to see all the possible squares that the knight is covering, just so that way we know that we're not losing anything. And if you looked on the opponent's last move, the knight is in fact targeting our pawn on b2. So we need to defend the pawn on b2. You guys are also going to be learning about the fact that offense is the best defense. So I'm going to play the move queen to b1. What queen to b1 does, it not only guarded the pawn, it also attacks the opponent's knight. And if you guys are looking very keenly at the position, I know that you guys are at the low level now, but just really look on all the squares that the knight is able to go. The knight does not have any good squares. So we could say in this position, his knight is trapped. And because the knight is trapped, we're actually threatening to just take the knight on the next move. There are moves that the opponent could play, though, to defend the knight. For example, Black wants to play a move now where if I take the knight, he's able to take back my queen. There's two ways to do this. There's queen to f5 and there's bishop to f5. It's very important that you guys understand how counting works. I'm attacking the knight once. He's guarding the knight once. What do I need to do in order to win the knight? I need to attack the knight twice. So let's pull the bishop back to c2. Now I have two pieces attacking the knight. He only has one piece guarding the knight. There's also no additional ways for my opponent to add more defense to the knight. So he's definitely going to be losing this knight. One more thing that I want you guys to learn is a battery. This is called a battery. Whenever you see two pieces on the same line doing the same work, it's called a battery. So in this case, it's the queen and the bishop, two pieces on the same line, on the diagonal, doing the same work. They're both attacking the opponent's knight. So it's a battery. Knight back to b4 was played. I mean, yes, there's two pieces attacking my knight, but the opponent put the knight on a square that I could simply take. However, one thing that you guys are going to be hearing me saying is whenever you find a good move, always look for a better one. Because taking the knight here is in fact a good move. I'm not going to lie. Taking the knight is a really nice move. But I like the idea of taking the bishop. Why do I like the idea of taking the bishop? For one, it's called an in-between move. And two, taking the bishop is also attacking the opponent's queen. And my queen is guarding my bishop. So if the queen decides to take the bishop, my queen is going to take the opponent's queen. So my opponent decided to move the queen away. Again, it's very important that you look on the opponent's last move. And at this level, I don't want you guys to just be looking on the opponent's last move just to see what they're attacking so that way you get all nervous and then you just lose. You also want to see if they also made a blunder. For example, the queen is on d6. If we have a look on every single piece that we have, which you need to ensure that you're paying attention to all your pieces, we're going to notice that the bishop on g2 is pointing towards that queen on d6. So the opponent also just blundered their queen. So let's just grab the queen in this position, and the knight is also still hanging. So once he takes back the bishop, I'm just going to take the knight, and we're going to be ahead by a ton of material. And the opponent resigns. Another game is off the books. Our opponent is 178. We're currently rated 157. Pawn to e4 was played. I'm not sure if I already played pawn to e5, but I want to ensure that we play all the opening, even though you should not be focusing on the opening. But let's decide to play the Caracan defense in this line. And then my opponent plays the move queen to h5. Now, this is called an early queen attack. You're going to be seeing people taking out their queen very, very early when you guys are playing. He's basically trying to play the move bishop to c4 followed by queen or bishop takes on f7. It's called the scholar's mate or the shepherd's mate. But right now, the queen is not attacking anything. We already looked on the last move. We noticed the queen is not attacking anything. So we're going to attack the queen. The best way to attack the queen is to play a development move. We develop our knight and we attack the queen at the same time. And now the queen decides to go to f5. Now remember, if you develop your queen too early, this is what is going to happen to you. I'm going to be making development moves. You're going to be moving the queen all over the board, and you're going to be wasting so much time, all because you wanted to win quickly. So First thing is, I'm noticing that the queen on f5 is on the same diagonal as my bishop. The move that I'm about to play is called a discovered attack, where I move my pawn out the way, so that way I'm attacking his pawn, but my bishop is secretly attacking his queen. This tactic is called a discovered attack. He is forced to move his queen again, and he did not see the fact that his queen is hanging. You know, the type of chess that you guys are going to be seeing at this level. But I'm just now going to take the opponent's queen off the board. I'm already ahead by a queen, and he didn't even take back the bishop, which is crazy. But with that being said, because my bishop is under attack, let's just take one of the pawns. Now, I have two options here. Do I take the g4 pawn or do I take the e4 pawn? I'm actually going to take the e4 pawn because if I take the e4 pawn, I'm forking both the unprotected rook and the unprotected pawn on c2. He also did not protect the rook. He decided to develop his knight. And now we're just going to be taking the rook. And again, we're ahead by massive amount of material. Whenever you're ahead by massive amount of materials like this, your goal is to start trading pieces off the board, ensure that you capture all the opponent's pieces, and eventually you're going to be able to deliver a checkmate. For example, notice how the opponent's last move was guarding the pawn on g4, and we have one piece attacking g4, and they also have one piece guarding g4. This is where counting comes in. We could actually try to win this pawn on g4 by just trying to attack it again. For example, we could play queen d7, queen c8, bishop f3, which attacks the pawn on g4, and it also applies some pressure to the opponent's knight. Now, because I'm ahead by 15 points, I'm willing to trade. I'm going to be trading all the pieces off the board. That's how it's going to be easy for me to win. Knight back to g1 was played. Look, on the opponent's last move, it is attacking my unprotected bishop. But the reason why I put the bishop on f3 in the first place was to target this pawn on g4. Let's count. The pawn is being guarded once. I'm attacking the pawn twice. So once I take the pawn and the bishop takes, my knight is there guarding my bishop and I'm fine. Now, you guys are going to be winning a lot of games from 0 to 500 just by trying to develop your pieces. And then while you're trying to develop your pieces, your opponents are just going to be blundering. For example, bishop to f4, he finally developed a piece, a move that is not a blunder. Let's try to finish our development. Let's finally try to finish our development. Let's play the move knight to d7, developing my knight towards the center of the board, not putting my knight on the edge of the board because knights on the rim is dim. And then the opponent is also, okay, he's finally developing his pieces. Now, here's another concept of counting that I'm going to be introducing you to, guys. It's not necessarily, counting is not necessarily about capturing. It's all about, okay, I'm trying to put my pawn or a piece on a certain square. But what if you're trying to put one of your pieces on a square that the opponent is already guarding? You have to ensure that you're guarding that square. So he's guarding the square twice. But I'm also guarding the square twice. So once I play the move pawn to e5, attacking his bishop, I mean, the guy immediately pre-moved and attacked my knight. If he had taken on e5, my knight would have just take back. But because I have such an advantage in material, I don't mind trading. I am going to be taking his bishop. And then once he takes my knight, we're trading the pieces off the board, which is what I want to do. And I'm also going to be finishing my development, which is also ultimately what I'm trying to do. He develops his knight to f3. Let's finally get to our king out the center of the board. I'm trying to play as principled as I possibly can. And then he moves his king. Now, from here, because I managed to get all my minor pieces out, usually the time to focus on your queen and your rooks is when your knights and your bishops are already developed. Now, I'm going to be focusing on my queen and my rook. So let's start by playing the move rook to e8 check. I'm checking the king. I'm forcing the opponent to react to this move. And I am, in fact, trying to start my attack. He moves his king to d3. The king is now not able to go anywhere here. The king is also not able to go here. So my plan from here is to try to set up a checkmating attack. Let's start by playing the move queen to b6, attacking this unprotected pawn, but I'm actually also trying to check his king. He moves his rook to a1, did not do anything. This is where you guys should be looking for the checkmates now. I'm going to play the move pawn to c5. This is called a pawn break. I have enough pieces covering the c5 square. He plays pawn to b3. Now we take the pawn on d4. And I'm just trying to deliver a checkmate from here. Like the opponent king now really has nowhere to go, which means once I check the king, it's going to be a checkmate. I do have some checks. I'm not seeing them leading to a checkmate though. Like if I check here, the king goes back. If I check here, the king takes. It could also check here, but then he's able to block. The opponent's last move was attacking my h7 pawn, but he has more important thing that he needs to worry about. He's about to get checkmated. So actually, let's not check. Let's play the move rook to c8. I'm sure I did not miss any checkmate, but now I'm really threatening a checkmate. Hopefully, you were able to find the checkmate. He finally decided to take the h7 pawn, a free pawn. But because the king has nowhere to go, I'm going to simply play the move rook to c3, and that's just a checkmate. Our opponent from the US is now 183. Let's play pawn to e4. E5 was played, and from here, we spoke about this very simple chess, developing four minor pieces. Take out the knight, take out the bishops. That's all we're doing to move from 100 to 200. We're also looking on the opponent's last move to spot when they blunder. For example, he decided to play bishop to c5. He did not guard his pawn. That is, in fact, a free pawn, but I really do not advise you guys to be trying to capture free pawns too early on in the opening stage of the game. It's more productive if you develop your pieces. So that's what I'm doing. The setup that I'm using is called the Italian game, but I want you guys to notice every piece that I'm developing, I'm trying to point them towards these four central squares. Like if you're not able to point the pieces towards the four central squares, then more than likely you're not playing good development moves. The opponent developed his knight to f6, which is attacking my unprotected pawn on e4. So all I'm going to do in this situation is I'm going to develop my knight to c3, and I'm going to be guarding my pawn on e4. So even though I had to play a defensive move, I am ensuring that I'm developing my pieces. Black is also developing. I'm not going to lie. My opponent is playing very well for 183. Now, there's two things I could do. I could castle my king, or I could play pawn to d3. Both of these are good moves. Let's play the move pawn to d3. Now, let's see the type of mistakes that these. Okay, pawn to, is this guy trying to copy all my moves? He just played pawn to d. Let's see. Let me castle my king. Let me get my king out the center of the board, and let's see if he's also going to be castling his king. And keep in mind, if you're playing with the white pieces and you notice that your opponent is copying your moves, don't worry, he's actually going to be getting checkmated before us. So let's keep going. He got his king out the center of the board. Now I'm going to be developing my last piece. My king is safe. I already developed 3 out of 4 pieces. Let's develop the last piece. Remember what we said? This is called a pin. It's called a relative pin because he is still able to move his knight out the way. Now, if he plays the move bishop to g4, he's really just trying to copy all my moves. Okay, he's not trying to copy all my moves. He decided to play the move knight to b4, but we know exactly how to approach this. Like, first thing we do is we look on the opponent's last move. Boom, boom, boom. It's not attacking anything in my half of the board. The knight going back doesn't do anything. We don't want pieces on our half of the board. So the moment the knight go on our half of the board, we immediately play a move like pawn to a3, chasing that knight out of our half of the board. And if he decides not to move the knight, then we're just going to be taking a free knight. He pulls the knight back to c6, and this is called wasting time, by the way. If you notice, the knight goes to b4 just to come back to c6. That's wasting time. No, all 4 of my minor pieces are developed. My king is castled. What's the plan? Usually the plan is to start getting the major pieces in the game, but this is like one of the first traps of the Italian game that you guys are going to be learning. Like the knight is pinned. I like to use this term called PP on the PP, where if you have a piece that is pinned, you want to play moves like knight to d5 and apply pressure to the pin piece. Because now it seems as if, okay, he's just trying to trade knights. But if he takes the knight, which he did, he's exposing his queen. These are the types of tactics that I want you guys to be using in your games. Now he lost his queen. He decided to take back my bishop. Now his knight is still not being guarded. So let's just take the knight on d5. And I'm just ahead by a full queen in this position. My bishop is also applying some pressure to his knight. So he still has to have a level of carefulness. My bishop is also on the same diagonal as his king. He decided to play the move knight to d4. Always keep in mind, whenever you are ahead in material, you want to trade pieces off the board. And the knight is also on our half of the board. We do not allow pieces on our half of the board. So let's just take the free knight. Oh, it's not free. It's not free. It's just a trade. So he took on d4. And here I want to play an attacking move. Here's my idea. I want you guys to notice how I have one piece attacking f7 and he has one piece guarding f7. This is where counting comes in. You don't necessarily have to give up on the fact that, okay, f7 is safe, because you always want to ensure that you're attacking pawns and squares that is around the opponent's king. So now I'm going to play the move queen to f3. Now I have 2 pieces attacking this pawn on f7, and he basically did not try to guard it. He moves the pawn to a5. So because I have two attackers and the opponent only has one defender, I'm just going to be taking on f7 with a check. I'm also forcing the opponent's king to move out of the way. Okay, once the opponent's king move out the way, this is an unprotected pawn, so let's take the unprotected pawn. I'm also attacking the unprotected rook, so it has to be careful. He decided to move. Whoa, that was very reckless of me. He legit just trapped my queen, and I didn't even see that my queen was getting trapped. That is crazy. My queen has nowhere to go. The good thing is, I'm ahead by 8 full points. So even though my queen is trapped, I'm just going to lose my queen to his rook, and he still has to take back the queen, and I'm still ahead by 4 points. So it's still a very easy game for me to play. Now, because I'm ahead in material, my goal is to trade pieces off the board. So I'm going to play the move pawn to b4. Now, pawn to b4, you guys are probably saying it's a counting issue because he has two pieces on b4. I only has the pawn on b4. But here's my idea. Once he takes and I take back, notice how my rook is now open to attacking his rook and his bishop is under attack. So if his bishop takes my pawn, I take his rook, which is what he did. He blundered his rook, and this will also lead to a back rank checkmate. Once I take his rook, he has to block the check with one of his pieces. It doesn't matter if he moves the bishop to c8 or e8. Once I take the bishop, it's going to be a checkmate. He blocks, we take, that's mate. Our next opponent from the US is 205. We already played e4, we already played d4. I am going to play e4 again, but I'm not going to be playing the Italian game, seeing that I already played the Italian game. I want to use as many openings as I possibly can, so you guys are able to not only understand one opening, but to understand how chess works. And my opponent is playing the Scandinavian defense. I do not recommend these types of defenses at the low level, because once I take the pawn on d5, I'm basically pulling out his queen, which means the Scandinavian defense is actually a very solid opening, but it breaks opening principles because you are developing your queen too early. How we try to punish this is we play development move and we attack the opponent's queen at the same time. Now, at the lower level, they usually try to check our king somewhere, which is bad. The best move is to just move the queen to a5 or just pull the queen back to d8. He decided to pull the queen back to d6, which is actually a theoretically good square for the queen. For now, let's just finish our development. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pawn in the center of the board. Remember that it's very important to have a pawn in the center of the board. It really helps us in controlling the major central squares. The opponent plays pawn to e6. Not a terrible move, but please do not be blocking out your bishops like this whenever you guys are playing. Now let's just finish our development. I only have one of my pieces that is developed. Let's develop the other piece. Now I have two of my pieces that is developed. What's the plan from here? Develop the next two pieces, get the king castled, then we start our attack. Pawn to c5 was played. It's not a terrible move, but my opponent is not following opening principles. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is if you're trying to follow principles and your opponent is constantly breaking principles, moving pawns when he should be developing his pieces, developing his queen too early, blocking in his bishop, you are able or you are allowed and you should also break principles. It's called breaking the balance. So even though none of my bishops are developed and my king is not yet castled, I still decided to play the move knight b5 and attack his queen because he's breaking too many principles. The queen moves over to b6. At least he was able to see that I'm attacking his queen. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I want you guys to, I'm sure you guys know about this pattern where if I put my knight on c7, that's a fork. But if I put my knight on c7 now, the queen is just going to take. But we know how to count. And that's why I'm going to play a principled move, which is to develop my bishop to f4. And I'm also threatening to play the move knight c7. And this move is just going to be forking the king and the rook. And usually, at the beginner level, if you manage to quickly fork your opponent's queen and the rook or king and the rook, it usually concludes the game. And the opponent is basically helping me. He's like pushing me to fork him. He puts his pawn to a6. He's attacking my knight. I am thinking of playing bishop to c7, trying to trap his queen, but his queen would move to this c6 square. And there's also moves like knight e5, which attacks the queen again, but then the queen is able to check. So let's just play the move knight c7. Let's check the king. Let's attack the rook. My bishop guards the c7 square. So if he's trying to lose his queen to take my knight, that's on him. He is forced to move his king, and he also has to be careful where he puts the king, but he decided to resign. And here's the game that is going to be taking us to 200. My opponent is rating 220. He plays e4, and okay, I've played e5, I've played the Caracan. Let's play the Scandinavian defense. I'm going to be showing, okay, I wanted to say I'm going to be showing you guys the right way to break principles, but he decided to just allow me to take his pawn for free. Like, he developed his knight, but that's actually just a free pawn, and I'm attacking his knight. So he has to be careful where he puts the knight as well, because if he puts the knight on d4, which he did, come on, guys, like, you have to ensure that, like, before you make a move, just check the opponent's pieces and ask yourself, is one of his pieces covering this square? Because that's now just a free knight, and there's nothing guarding the knight, so it's just completely free. He develops his bishop. At least he's trying to play some development move. Let's also try to follow principles here. Let's develop my knight. The goal is still development. He castles the king. Very good. Let me develop my other knight. And eventually, I'm assuming that he's going to be attacking my queen, which he did. But I'm just going to, let's just pull the queen back to d8 here. We already gained free material. We're going to be finishing our development. Then we're going to be going for our attack. He puts his knight on the edge of the board, which is not recommended, but there wasn't anywhere else for the knight. So let's see what he's trying to do. But let's just keep developing. I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. All I want to do is move my pawn, develop my last piece, and then he's going to be feeling the attack. He moves the bishop. Let's look on his last move. Not really doing much. Let's move the pawn. So that way we could develop our last piece. We're also trying to get to our king castle. And then the attack is going to start. So pawn to b4 was played. It's not necessarily good because, well, it's okay. He's trying to develop his bishop. He's also preventing my bishop from going to the c5 square, because if I put my bishop on c5, the pawn is going to take, but I'm able to put my bishop on d6. So I could now say all 4 of my minor pieces are developed. All I need to do now is to castle my king. But we have to look on the opponent's last move. His last move was attacking my knight. Don't just castle the king. Don't just play some automatic moves. We have to ensure that we put our knight to safety. Knights on the rim is dim. We're not going to be putting the knight on the edge of the board. We're going to be pulling the knight back to e7. And it could also assist us with a kingside attack. Because my goal from here is to start moving my pieces closer to the opponent's king. No, he plays pawn to f3, which is not a terrible move, but he is exposing this diagonal pointing towards his king. Let me just use the time to get my king out the center of the board. Now I'm going to start my attack. He took the pawn. Let's just take with the bishop. That's fine. His rook gets the open file, but my knight is guarded, so I'm not worried about anything. He should be worried about this diagonal, but then he just played rook to b1. Now, the reason why I like to tell you guys to ensure that you look on the opponent's last move, and I'm going to say it again, it's not just to see what they're attacking. We also want to see the blunders that they make, because he just puts his rook on b1. A rook is 5 points. A bishop is only 3 points. So even though his rook is guarded, once we take this rook, we're going to be getting a profitable exchange, because we're going to be getting a 2-point profit for that exchange. Okay, he didn't even take the bishop. So let me just pull my bishop back to e4. The guy didn't even take the bishop. He didn't see that he could have used his knight to take the bishop. But then he decides to attack my bishop with his rook. But my bishop is already being guarded by my knight. So I don't mind if he takes my bishop. Let's give a check. Let's check his king. He has to defend against this check. He did defend against the check by moving his king out the way. And because it's time to start my attack, I'm going to get my queen into the game. Let's go queen to d7, thinking about just moving my queen. And again, he just did not see that the bishop was guarded by my knight. So let's just take his rook. I'm also threatening a very nasty fork, which my opponent saw, but there is still a way in which we could win the opponent's queen. Please ensure that you're able to find it. But what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to play the move knight to f2 check. My bishop is guarding my knight on f2. So if the queen takes on f2, my bishop takes the queen and I'm fine. But now that he moves the king to g1, he's putting his king on the same diagonal as my bishop. So all I need to do in this position to attack his king is to literally put my knight anywhere. But where am I going to put the knight? I'm going to put the knight on the d3 square. The bishop checks the king. The knight attacks the queen. He moves his king. We take the queen. We're ahead by what? 20 points? And he should be getting checkmated in the next few moves. But my opponent resigns.